The year is 1917, the place is Russia, a vast empire is about to crack. It will not be a clean break, it will be a brutal, bloody affair. This is not just a changing of the guard, this is a revolution. Russia was a land of extremes, opulence for the few, poverty for the many. The Romanov dynasty in power for centuries seemed invincible, but beneath the surface the fires of discontent were burning. The people were tired, they were hungry, they were ready for change. The First World War was a catastrophe for Russia. Millions of soldiers were sent to their deaths, the economy was in shambles. The Tsar, Nicholas II, was seen as weak and out of touch. He was a relic of a bygone era, an era that was about to end. The war exposed the fragility of the Tsarist regime. It also fueled the flames of revolution. The people blamed the Tsar for their suffering. They demanded change. They demanded an end to the war. They demanded bread. The Russian economy was in ruins. Inflation was rampant. Food was scarce. People were starving. The cities were filled with discontent. Workers toiled in terrible conditions. The peasants who made up the majority of the population were trapped in poverty. The Tsar's response to the crisis was inadequate. He seemed oblivious to the suffering of his people. He relied on repression to silence dissent, but the people would not be silenced. They were ready to fight for their future. In February 1917, the pot boiled over. Strikes and demonstrations erupted in Petrograd, the capital city. The Tsar ordered the army to restore order, but the soldiers, many of whom were peasants in uniform, refused to fire on the protesters. Instead, they joined them. The February Revolution, as it became known, was swift and decisive. The Tsar, isolated and abandoned, was forced to abdicate. The Romanov dynasty, which had ruled Russia for 3 centuries, was gone. The old world was crumbling. A new era was dawning. The fall of the Tsar did not bring peace. It ushered in a period of chaos and uncertainty. A provisional government composed of liberals and moderate socialists was formed. They promised democracy and reform, but they were unable to control the forces unleashed by the revolution. In the midst of the chaos, a new power emerged, the Bolsheviks. Led by the ruthless and charismatic Vladimir Lenin, the Bolsheviks were a radical socialist party. They promised the people peace, land, and bread. Lenin was a master strategist. He had been waiting for this moment. He knew that Russia was ripe for revolution. He returned from exile to seize the moment. His message resonated with the masses. The Bolsheviks were a disciplined and organized force. They had a clear vision for Russia. They were determined to seize power. They believed that they were the vanguard of the proletariat, the true representatives of the working class. In October 1917, the Bolsheviks launched a coup d'état. They seized control of key government buildings and communication centers. The provisional government, weak and divided, collapsed. The Bolsheviks had triumphed. They promised a new era of equality and justice. But the promises were hollow. The Bolsheviks, once in power, revealed their true nature. They were ruthless and totalitarian. They would stop at nothing to achieve their goals. They established a one-party state. They crushed all opposition. The revolution, which had promised freedom, had given birth to a new form of tyranny. The Bolsheviks unleashed a reign of terror. They ruthlessly eliminated their opponents, real or imagined. The Cheka, the Bolshevik secret police, became the instrument of this terror. They were everywhere, watching, listening, waiting to pounce. The Red Terror, as it became known, was a period of unprecedented violence and brutality. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed, millions more were imprisoned or sent to labor camps. No one was safe, not the aristocracy, not the clergy, not even the peasants who had initially supported the revolution. The Cheka operated with impunity. They were above the law. They were the law. They were judge, jury, and executioner. Fear became the defining characteristic of life under Bolshevik rule. People lived in a state of constant terror. They were afraid to speak their minds. They were afraid to trust their neighbors. They were afraid to even think. The revolution had devoured its children. The very people it claimed to liberate were now its victims. The streets were filled with informers. Whispers could lead to arrest. Disappearances became commonplace. Families were torn apart. Children were orphaned. The human cost of the revolution was staggering. The Bolsheviks had promised a utopia. They had delivered a nightmare. Section 8, Crushing Dissent. The Bolsheviks consolidated their power. They created a totalitarian state. They controlled every aspect of life, from the economy to the media to the arts. They rewrote history to suit their narrative. They indoctrinated the youth. They silenced all dissent. Opposition was ruthlessly suppressed. The press was censored. Free speech was abolished. Independent thought was dangerous. The Bolsheviks claimed to represent the will of the people, but they ruled through fear and intimidation. The revolution had gone terribly wrong. It had betrayed its ideals. It had descended into tyranny. Section 9, a legacy of contradictions. The Russian Revolution was a watershed moment in history. It toppled a centuries-old monarchy. It inspired revolutionary movements around the world. But it also served as a cautionary tale. It showed the dangers of utopian ideology, the seductive power of absolute power, and the corrupting influence of fear. The revolution left an indelible mark on Russia. It shaped the country's destiny for decades to come. It led to the creation of the Soviet Union, a superpower that would play a pivotal role in the 20th century. It also left a legacy of repression, violence, and mistrust. The revolution's legacy is complex and contradictory. It is a story of both hope and despair. It is a reminder that even the noblest of ideals can be twisted and abused. Section 10. A world transformed. The Russian Revolution had a profound impact on global politics. It inspired communist movements around the world. It led to the creation of new states based on Marxist-Leninist ideology. It also intensified the rivalry between communism and capitalism. The Cold War, which dominated the second half of the 20th century, was a direct consequence of the Russian Revolution. The world was divided into two camps, each with its own ideology, its own values, its own vision for the future. The Russian Revolution was a global event. Its shockwaves were felt in every corner of the world. It changed the course of history. Section 11. The Paradox of Revolution. The Russian Revolution was a tale of power and paradox. It was a story of liberation and oppression, of hope and despair, of idealism and brutality. It was a revolution that promised a new world, but it ended up creating a new form of tyranny. The revolution's ideals were noble, but its execution was flawed. It showed that the path to hell is often paved with good intentions. The revolution's legacy is a reminder that power corrupts, that absolute power corrupts absolutely. The Russian Revolution is a story that continues to fascinate and horrify. It is a story that is both timeless and timely. It is a story that we can learn from, even as we struggle to comprehend its full complexity.